In the previous lecture, I introduced you to the law of supply, and the law of supply essentially gives us, or is also based on, upward sloping supply curve. And what upward sloping supply curve means is that sellers are willing to sell more at a higher price and less at a lower price. Why does this happen? Think about it and you can perhaps answer this question. Now look at some exceptions to the law of supply. Suppose in real world situation we find a downward sloping supply curve, and a downward sloping supply curve would look something like a downward sloping demand curve, and that means in the case of supply the seller is willing to sell more at a lower price and less at a higher price. Can you think of some real world situation where this may happen? Look at another exception to the law of supply. Suppose the supply curve is horizontal. If a supply curve is horizontal, what does it mean about the seller? Or what does it imply about the seller? And can you think of some real world example where this may be true? Another exception to the law of supply, is the vertical supply curve. Again, when you have a vertical supply curve, what does it mean or what does it imply from the seller's perspective? And can you find a real world example where this may be valid? So we know about law of supply, we also know about exceptions to the law of supply. Now look at another situation. Excuse me. We still have the same prices that we have been using, $1, $2, $3, $4, and $5 per cup. And suppose the quantity supplied that we had in the previous video applied to 2012, and we are still looking at market supply, which is measured in terms of number of cups, and we have this information. Now suppose in 2013 at $1 per cup, last year the seller was willing to sell this or supply 2 million cups of coffee to the market, and now they are willing to supply 5 million cups of coffee to the market at a price of $2 per cup. In 2012, these sellers were willing to supply 4 million cups of coffee to the market, and now they are willing to supply 7 million cups of coffee to the market. And the same kind of phenomena you observe at each given price, that in 2013 the sellers are willing to sell more relative to what they were willing to sell in 2012 at each given price. Now the question we ask, why does this happen? Why do people want to sell more cups of coffee at every given price? In order to understand this, we'll have to go back to the original supply equation, and let us do that. Now this is the equation that we are familiar with, and I'm sorry, this should be quantity supplied, so it's QSC, it should not be demand. That's my mistake. And quantity supplied of coffee depends upon price per cup of coffee, input prices, and technology. And when we derived the supply curve, what we did is we looked at the impact of price per cup of coffee on quantity supplied of coffee. When we did that, we invoked ceteris paribus. That means we held these variables constant. And these variables are input prices and technology. So the upward sloping supply curve and its location depends on the fact we are looking at the relationship between price per cup of coffee on quantity supplied of coffee, and when we did that we assumed input prices and technology stay the same. Now when input prices and technology change, the supply curve will shift, and it could shift to the right or to the left. Now, we know in 2013 the sellers are willing to sell more at each given price relative to 2012. And why would this happen? Why would a seller be willing to sell more at each given price? One of the reasons for that is input prices. And if input prices have fallen or have decreased, this will cause an increase in supply. Another reason for this is technical progress. And one of the things that technical progress does is it enables lower cost of production. So in other words, whether input prices fall or we have technical progress, or both of them, what they impact is the cost of production. And when cost of production falls, maybe the sellers may be willing to sell more at each given price. Now, let us show all this in terms of it. Once again, we are looking at market supply curve. We have quantity supplied of coffee as in millions of cups. On the vertical axis, we have price per cup of coffee as in dollars per cup. The blue curve is the supply curve for 2012. The red curve is the supply curve for 2013. So when you compare 2013 to 2012, what you find is the supply curve has shifted to the right, and this is called a rightward shift of the supply curve. And what does rightward shift of the supply curve indicate? It indicates an increase in supply at each given price. And that is what a rightward shift of the supply curve implies. Now we have done this for an increase in supply. You can do the same thing for a decrease in supply. When we have a decrease in supply, the supply curve will shift to the left, and a leftward shift of the supply curve will indicate a decrease in supply. A quick recap of what we have done. One is to understand market. We have looked at the behavior of buyers or consumers, and all this we have done through the demand curve. And in this video and the previous one, what we have done is we have tried to understand the economic behavior of sellers or suppliers, and all this is captured through the supply curve. Or in other words, what we have done is we have looked at the behavior of consumers separately and the behavior of sellers separately. In terms of lesson plan, what we'll do is we'll bring consumers and sellers together, and then essentially what we'll be looking at is the market, and that is where I'll define what we mean by equilibrium. So thank you